for those who are not here and for posterity. I don't know. All right. We are recording. So here we are. So we'll take a moment just to center ourselves on the flame, the light of our faith, the light of our own divinity. We will hear a little bit about that light during this session. So we do have an opening reading, which is actually a hymn, and I don't know if you've been able to keep up with the readings, but some of the reading assignments have actually been to read some of the hymns and to kind of dip your toe into some of the embedded history there. So this is a hymn from our great hymnal by Keshab Chandra Sen, and it's an arrangement by John Haynes Holmes, a name you will hear again. Unto the Church Universal, which is the depository of all ancient wisdom and the school of all modern thought, which recognizes in all prophets a harmony, in all scriptures a unity, and through all dispensations a continuity, which abjures all that separates and divides, and always magnifies all that unifies and brings peace, which seeks truth in freedom, justice in love, and individual discipline in social duty, and which shall make of all sects, classes, nations, and races one global community. Unto this church and unto all its members, known and unknown throughout the world, we pledge the allegiance of our hands and hearts.
I'm going to do a screen share first.
Screen share.
Oh no, that was from last session. Right. Sorry.
Okay.
You're sharing.
No problem. So I'm going to open up the floor here for just some sharing. It feels like it's only been 2 weeks, but it feels like some time since we've been together. And I guess for some of us, it has been nearly 4 weeks. So, what's percolating? What in the reading is percolating for you? Are there ideas that have emerged or ideas that you're working through for implementing any pieces or parts of UU history into your work? You can raise your hand, or you can we're small enough, you can just go ahead and shout it out.
This is Meredith on the phone, and one of the things kind of following up from last session where we talked about the Midwest and West, and one of the things I've been dealing with in work is that we have our coming of age class take a Boston trip each year, but it's a very short trip. It's like a long weekend, and it's very expensive, especially given that it's just basically 72 hours of a trip. And so I've been trying to figure out what to do about that. And one of the ideas raised on the UU Religious Education Facebook page was to do a Chicago trip. And I'm kind of thinking, we're just outside of Chicago, and so I'm curious to investigate what Unitarian and Universalist history there is in the Chicago area, and kind of dig into that a little bit to see about, I think we'll probably still end up doing the Boston trip, but I think it'd be pretty neat for the youth to have an experience of local Unitarian and Universalist history earlier in the, maybe halfway through the program. So that's one thing that's kind of percolating coming out of the last session.
That is great. I love that idea. And of course, Meadville is there too. So there's another resource for you right in Chicago, in the city of Chicago. So that's great.
Right. Yeah.
I think we're quite ready for that. I think I just bumped that.
So
So,
keep mentioning in the readings about people going to seminary in Meadville, Pennsylvania. Is that related at all to the school in Chicago?
yeah, there is a connection there. There is not a school in Meadville, Pennsylvania anymore. It was, trying to think of the history of Meadville Lombard. I'm not a Meadville Lombard graduate. Is anybody a Meadville Lombard graduate and knows yeah. So, I mean, I think there was a Pac-Man merger there that happened at some point. And, they had significant real estate, financial holdings at the University of Chicago there. And so the Meadville folks picked up their stakes, I think, and joined. So yes, there is a connection there. And there is not a seminary in Meadville, Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
Okay, Jansen is here. Hi, Jansen.
Hi,
Oh, and Courtney's here. Awesome.
I'd like to share my thinking. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, just lean into your microphone. You sometimes you kind of go back and forth.
Okay. Well, our coming of age trip kind of spawned an interest in having some history materials available for that group. They managed to skip the one lesson from coming of age that it talked about the history, and so they were getting ready to go to Boston with no idea what they were going to do and the people they were going to visit and the churches, and that was frustrating. As a last minute thing, I had them watch the American Unitarianism chapter in the movie series from Ron Fortas,
Mm-hmm.
Long Strange Trip. And I found a couple of YouTube videos about Thoreau and Louisa May Alcott, because they were going to visit the Alcott house. So there was better than nothing, but only slightly better than nothing.
Mm.
And I went on a search for something for them unsuccessfully. There doesn't seem to be anything in the curriculum, and so even before we started, I sort of knew what my project was going to be. Fill that gap.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I've been thinking about. I posted today some ideas, and sort of building on some of the other postings.
Great. Super.
So that's me.
Good possibilities for a project. Yeah, that's great. Good.
Yeah, and I think finding videos is a good way to go.
Yeah.
It can be very accessible, and that's a way to reach youth and all ages at this time when you're trying to share information like that. So, kudos for finding what you found, and we'll see what else is out there and what else we can create for sure. Anyone else?
So, it's Bart. I just came back from 2 back-to-back trips, one at Midwest Youth Leadership School, and then another, and then went right from that over to the International Council of Unitarians and Universalist Young Adult Gathering. And I think something that's been kind of percolating as a part of this class is establishing the arc as ours within individuals, but leaving the international gathering it left me with so much more questions and answers. The Kazi Hills, they have a very different version of Unitarianism that I think would look quite at home in some of our congregations. Or, the Unitarians in Transylvania, their relationship to Unitarianism as Hungarians in Romania, and what that's like, and how their deep tradition, and also how sometimes our deep traditions and having that knowledge doesn't necessarily mean that will continue. But I saw within the Transylvanians there this really a cultural identity of Unitarianism that I think comes from knowing one's ancestors in a deep and meaningful way. And I think that sometimes we lack, as a come interfaith, as a chosen faith, that connection to our Unitarian and Universalist ancestors. And so how do we deepen that level of engagement, while also knowing that that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a deeper connection to our faith or a lasting connection? Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Bart.
That's great.
Love to hear more about that gathering
Yeah,
at another time. Sure. Great. And so I've been, I read your write-ups from last session, and I think there were 7 so far. So I know there's a few of you that haven't had a chance to write them up. I'd really love you to add your post to the forum so you can get credit for the course. And you've already started, sharing ideas of things you'd like to do for your projects, a bunch of you, and I'm excited about them. And we'll have some time to talk at the end of class about that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So,
any other sharing before we move on? We have space. Thoughts are forming.
So this is Scarlett. I thought I had, doing the reading this time, I had this thought, which like I'm getting the concrete information, and thinking about that, the specific each person, their role, and how that would relate to whether it's youth or adult RE. But this time when I was reading, instead, I sort of began to formulate like a bigger picture and maybe a selfie arc of how we have struggled and succeeded, in our journey to justice. And that I thought I need to go back and look at the original goals for the class, because I'm thinking like, okay, so now I've like sort of ramped it up to a different level, which is where we're supposed to get to eventually anyhow. So that's all. Those are my thoughts when I was reading this morning.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Sadie, do you want to
all right, we ready to screen share that?
into the timeline? Yes. We will do.
All right. Screen share. Oh, okay, here we go. I'm going to take turns doing this. Okay. Here's the first part of our timeline. Now, does that work? Does everyone see just the first page, or do you see my whole screen? Does this work? Just the screen?
We see the whole screen.
You seeing like the words behind it?
Yeah, your tabs and stuff.
Okay. Well, I think this is as good as we're going to get. Okay. So the first part of our timeline overlaps with last sessions. Is that correct? Did you learn a little bit about William Channing Gannett last time in the Western Unitarian Conference? So this is in 1887, the first thing on our timeline. This shows when the things commonly believed among us statement of faith was written and voted upon, and starting to show the influence of humanism on the Unitarian faith. And the World Parliament of Religions was in 1892, with Jenkin Lloyd Jones as the General Secretary for planning this event, which was the first time leaders of different faiths from around the world came together. And if you haven't read Karina's post on the forum, I recommend you do. She has she shared about colleagues of hers who have attended it 2 years ago. So it's still happening today, and this is when it started. This timeline also shares things that happened, what was going on in the time. And the Pullman strike in 1983, this was the time of financial panic. And one of our other books, I think it's the Unitarian Universalist in America, A People's History by John Behrens, talked about this influence in the other readings that were cut from this session. So you don't have that in your reading this time around. We did read more about the Suffolk Mission School this session. You started it last session. This is one of the lengthier stories we go in depth with this session. So Thomas Wise was the second African-American Universalist minister, and he was Joseph Jordan's successor, and he founded the Suffolk Mission 20 miles away from the Norfolk Mission. It offered school during the week and Sunday school on the weekends. And without support from the Universalist denominational leadership, Tom Weiss left the mission and left Universalism. His successor, Joseph Fletcher Jordan, and his family continued. The Suffolk Mission became known as the Jordan School, led by Jordan's daughter, and she was known as Miss Annie. We read about her. There were a couple choices for your reading because there were readings about them in two of the books that you had. And I'm curious, we will definitely talk about that more today. And during this time, Quillen Shin was the missionary to the southern states. I know you focused a little bit about him last week, or 2 weeks ago. He was a denominationally sanctioned Universalist missionary. He was known as the Grasshopper Missionary, and he inspired members to join and start congregations and Sunday schools, ladies' aids, and young people's Christian movements, unions, youth groups. At this time, in 1896, is when Plessy versus Ferguson court case occurred. This is the Supreme Court case that upheld the constitutionality of state laws requiring racial segregation in public facilities. The Spanish-American War was 1898. This is the timeline that tells you kind of what's going on. McKinley was assassinated in 1901. And then Clarence B. Thompson. He received fellowship with the American Unitarian Association, and we believe, apparently, without mentioning his race. And he served for 3 years as the minister of the Unitarian Church of Peabody, Massachusetts. And he was, I believe we read about him in Darkening the Doorways, and he was biracial. I think his mom was white and his dad was black. But we can read more about that in the book. The NAACP was founded in 1909. Unitarians Fanny Barrier Williams and Francis Watkins Harper, John Haynes Holm, and Mary White Ovington joined and helped form the NAACP. So we read a little bit about Clarence Russell Skinner. I know the link to his readings didn't work for some of you, so hopefully they're working now. They were updated, but so we can learn about him. He was a minister, a pacifist, and proponent of the kingdom of God on earth, and he worked towards a new age for universalism and new affirmation of human agency in building a better world. And at this time, the U.S. joined World War I. And during World War I, the American AUA denied support of congregations whose ministers did not support the war. Many Pacific Unitarian ministers lost their pulpits. Do you remember reading about this in the reading, or is this new to you guys? Does this sound familiar? Can you give me a thumbs up? Okay. This story was in the People's History that was cut from the reading, but it's fascinating that it was not okay for ministers at the time to say that they were against the war. Times have changed. Universalist Congregation Convention, the Declaration of Social Principles, was in 1917, and that was drafted by Clarence Skinner. We also learned this time around about Reverend Carter's, W.H.G. Carter's Church of, it's not fully there, but I think it's of Unitarian Brotherhood. Oh, there it is, Unitarian Brotherhood of Cincinnati. He converted to Unitarianism on his own, and he ran a church for 20 years, and he was denied support from the AUA. We can talk about that more later. Ethelred Brown served the Harlem Unitarian Church. He was the first ordained Black Unitarian minister. He was from Jamaica. There's a few stories in our readings about him, including a Tapestry of Faith story. And in 1920, he returned to New York. Oh, we don't have the whole story here. This is something I would love to edit if I was able to get into this software. He worked really hard to be able to become a minister. He went to the States from Jamaica, was told he didn't have the right papers. He went home. He came back a few years later once he had his papers in order and went to divinity school, was told you can be a Unitarian minister, but not to a white congregation. So he founded the Harlem Unitarian Church in New York. And we'll talk more about him today. The ACLU was founded in 1920. The Humanist Manifesto was in 1933, signed by 15 Unitarian ministers and 1 Universalist. Unitarians Face a New Age was the result of the first Commission on Appraisal by the AUA, and it made it clear that humanism was now the dominant theological position of the movement. We will talk more about that today as well. And Hymns of the Spirit was published in 1937, and this is precursor for, we'll learn more about this in the next session, but this was the first time the Unitarians and Universalists collaborated on a joint hymnal. And it's sort of showing how these two faiths are coming together. And it was the first one to include non-theist hymns. In 1946, Emily Green Balch was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And she's not in our readings, but it's on our timeline and important to know about. So I'm going to stop the screen share. And there's actually one, I actually like the other timeline. Oh, let me see if I can find it. That was for this session that you can, oops, having trouble finding it. It puts it all in one page, and on the bottom part of the timeline, it has like the historical events, and on the top, it has the characters that we read about and their publications, and it gives you a clearer picture than my version of the timeline does. So if you want a quicker review at times, that might be a helpful thing to look at. So thanks for bearing with me through that, walk down memory lane of your readings. What I'd like to do now, we're going to go into the opening discussion. So, yep, you've got the slides for that. Thank you, Pat. So I'd love to hear from you on what did you learn from your reading that helped you better understand this period of history, and or which events or people did you find inspiring? So in order to do that, I'd love to go through, we're just going to go in the order that I have written down here, and I'll just say your name and then who's going to be next, and we'll share from this. So the first person I have is going to be Terry, and then Courtney will be after Terry. So Terry, are you there?
Yes, hold on. Hold on a second.
Okay, that's all right. So you're just lucky that I wrote your name down first today when I started.
Looking at it. Okay, here I am. Okay,
so what did you learn from the reading and from this period, or who did you find inspiring?
Well, I learned that I didn't like the Unitarians very much from this period.
Mm-hmm.
I was angry. I was sad about what happened to the first African-American ministers, the racism that was expressed by the Unitarians, both overtly and covertly, and the lost opportunities. So it was kind of heartbreaking to read that piece of it. And I guess the second piece that I just actually just before this call, I read that optional reading essay about universalism, and I was just fascinated by it, by the idea of magic and the spirituality and the spiritualism and these different components of universalism. And so my mind's kind of pondering that piece as well. Because one of the questions I've kind of had is, where is the spirituality in some of the activism? Because there's a lot of activist stories and a lot of good ethics, and even this particular unit is the humanists. So it was intriguing to think about the idea that we are now entering a stage of empowerment where ethics was the 20th century was very much found, ethics of the Unitarians was very much needed. And now we're in a place where maybe the lessons of the Universalists and connecting with those spiritual sources might be even more needed. So that's where I'm at.
Thanks, Terry. Yeah. Courtney, you're next, and then Meredith will be after Courtney.
Okay. I think I had two things that really stood out to me. One was the description of universalism as the universal church of the world that everybody will eventually get to. And I think that really resonates with people in our congregation for sure, that maybe there's no one truth, but it's kindness, it's humanism. And then the other thing, in terms of event and people I found inspiring, the story of Carter, I think it was Carter in Cincinnati,
yep.
whose church kind of floundered and got closed down, and then they found his relatives 100 years later. Is that the right one?
Yep.
The story of the apology and the reconciliation and the attempts, and how it's a really long period of time, and sometimes, it's kind of that better late than never, but on a really big time scale. But the guest who had come and said, words are great, but actions are even better. That still just is so resonant. And
yeah,
I thought that was really poignant and a lesson that we can all listen to.
Yeah, it was powerful. Yeah, and that was in Darkening the Doorways. I think is it also in the Mission Builders? I think that it might be in both. But anyway.
I think there's a couple places, yeah. Maybe a Tapestry of Faith story even?
They might also have it there too, which would be great. Yeah, it's a good story to remember, and powerful, and definitely still relevant. Meredith, and then Jansen after Meredith.
I was particularly interested in the story of, I believe it was Sparrow, who there were just such difficulties finding a settlement for him, and other leaders stepping up and saying to take this seriously and try to find a congregation who will accept him as the minister, and everything that he went through there. And I think that one stuck out to me because I'm at a congregation where they're going into ministerial search this year, and I'm thinking about the Beyond Categorical Thinking workshop that they'll do, and the other ways in which we try to make sure that the congregation, at least as much as possible, is not looking too narrowly at who could possibly be their minister. So it's interesting and disheartening to find out more about the details of ministers who've had such a hard time finding a settlement.
It is. Yeah, thank you. Jansen, and then Jennifer's next. Is Jennifer here? I don't think so. Okay, so then Michelle after Jansen.
Okay. I didn't complete the reading, but I read all the hymns, and I was struck by how naturalistic they were. And I it kind of threw me off, thinking that the humanist, and then hearing all these hymns about the natural world. So it makes, so I'm a little confused about that.
Hmm.
You almost were more like something from.
So Jansen, unfortunately, it's a really bad connection. It's hard to hear what you're saying, and all I just heard was I'm confused about that. So what I would recommend is if you can type in the chat box your thoughts to this question, and then if you have a question for us, we can try and answer that.
All right, I'll do that.
Okay, thanks. So I did say that Michelle was next, but actually Michelle's not here either. So that means we've got Bart next. Are you ready, Bart? And then Lane after Bart?
I am always ready. So I actually may have read the entire book on the airplane. I've been flying a lot. So what really struck me, well.
Which book are you talking about? Darkening the Doorways or?
Darkening the Doorway.
Yeah, okay.
I read the entire book on the plane to Amsterdam. And, you know, I am very much a glasses half empty kind of guy most of the time. So what was, you know, what really stuck out to me were the similarities between the plight of African American Black ministers and our trans ministers today. I'm seeing similar stories from, you know, what I hear from my friends in the ministry. And I still see the same the same things happening, even to our, you know, religious professionals of color, you know, our DREs of color, our ministers of color. The stories are the same. And, you know, and Jackson's story about, you know, sticking up and trying to have the first Black Unitarian church, and Elliot kind of blowing him off, and the Unitarians blowing him off. And, you know, what opportunities have we as a faith just constantly missed? And how does that call us to be innovative and try harder and take chances now, even though we know our resources are so much less? And what could we have done back when we had all those resources that we squandered opportunities? And so that's kind of where I lingered and kind of meditated upon, you know, the Joseph Jordan. I kind of went through all of them, so they all kind of blend together. But, you know, Thompson's story, it breaks your heart, and it's also kind of a call back, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, we say Black Lives Matter, not only Black Lives Matter, but because they didn't, and they sure as hell didn't to Unitarians back in the day, even though they were abolitionists. So, you know, how are we called to continue working within ourselves to move forward? And I guess overall that's inspiring. I mean, it's depressingly inspiring. It's a call forward, right?
Yeah, I like that. Depressingly inspiring. It is. Thank you, Bart. Lane, and then Deborah Eve after Lane.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I have headphones in today. My daughter's home watching Steven Universe right now. So yeah, for me, a lot of the things that came up in these readings that have already been voiced from other people in the class, I had so much sadness and so much anger as I was reading this. My book is currently filled with sections that are highlighted and sad faces next to a lot of things. One of the really cool things for me is that one of the ministers at the congregation that I work at is Latina. And so she knows I'm taking this class, so I've been able to go to her and talk with her and get additional perspective. I told her I was reading Darkening the Doorways and about the sad faces. She's like, oh, you're going to need more highlighters. But it's been really good, engaging discussion to get it, and it's gotten it out of the book a little bit more for me as well. And along with the sadness and the anger, I was just blown away by the determination of these people in all of these readings, that they kept on going when there were so many points where they were told no. So that's what I got out of all that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you. I'm glad you're able to have those conversations. And
me too.
All right, Deborah Eve, and then Scarlett after.
Well, I guess I identify with I knew a lot of these stories, so I guess the anger part for me wasn't right there, but the despondency of it is there. Adding to that, last week I was co-director at the UUMN Children's Choir Camp, which is a whole other story that we don't have time for. But it was one of the worst experiences of my life as a worker. And so I guess I've been thinking just a lot about how this all plays out. I mean, in the Midwest, it's totally normal for people to sort of laugh that we're so white, as though we don't really have any responsibility to that. And so, I guess I've been thinking about that a lot. The thing that resonated most with me, because I guess I'm not feeling very inspired at all by any Unitarian Universalist at this week, but is in the McCannon keynote, where he talked about how early Unitarians ask how should they use the power that they already had, and that Universalists took more of a path of people who have asked how can we get more power. And I still see that as huge in Unitarian Universalist congregations and gatherings, playing out pretty much like it has been for hundreds of years, so that without people really thinking about it, it's still very much dominated by white maleness, and everyone else is pretty much on the periphery. And, I feel pretty powerless even in terms of being a white woman, so I cannot even imagine what it must feel like to be African American or an African American woman in terms of Unitarian Universalists. And maybe that story plays out differently in other parts of the country, but since I'm in the Midwest, and for the last couple summers, I've tried to go to at least more regional or national UU gatherings in my quest to try and figure out where I fit in. I become more and more closer to giving up in terms of people really understanding that these aren't just stories of individuals. And, my discipline's American Studies, so we have this culture and the mythology in the United States that everyone can make it. And so I really reject telling these as stories of people who didn't give up. I really see them as stories that remind us that the power relationships are almost exactly the same. We might be a little bit more polite to each other in terms of the kind of language we use, but sometimes that's about as far as it goes. So, I think this is an amazing history. I'm really interested in, for instance, the connection between Jamaica and the East Coast. I start thinking about Bob Marley and the whole concept of one love that we kind of appropriate, but I'm wondering if that isn't part of, that what some of these past stories have done has really contributed to the very core of how we think. So I would love to do some more research on some of those stories and, learn some more about them.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Deborah Eve. It's the power dynamics and the struggles definitely do continue. And I'm sorry that you were in the thick of that last week and you've been in there. And I do hope we can find a way to work.
Well, I appreciate you hearing me. I'm not exaggerating.
Sure. Yeah, no, it sounds like it was a
still in shock.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but thanks.
So, Scarlett's next, and then Karina's next after that.
Okay, I just have a couple comments. One of them is that I was humbled by the tenacity and the faith of those people that we read about, all those African Americans who kept moving on. And really, they were, like by the early 1900s, the Ku Klux Klan was in full swing, and they still persevered and gathered together and educated one another. And that's just humbling for me to see that people at our church, our faith, we had people that were strong enough to continue and believe in this universal goodness, I guess. And the other thing is, I was sad, just reading everything and feeling like, history is repeating itself again, whether it's African Americans or women or now the LGBTQ trans population, that we are discriminating and we are, putting them in and isolating them and not welcoming them. And that's sad that we're still having to revisit all of these issues, and that we're not back. Because I'm driving, I can't look at my notes. But I mean, the Universalists, several of those people we read about, they had the basic premise down that, that we're all the same, and that we need to look inside and not look at whether it's a physical characteristic or, our gender or whatever. And, we're more than 100 years later, and we still don't get it. So that's a little sad. But maybe it's just a call to action also.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, it is. We are tracing the roots here and seeing how long we've been saying some of these things that we want to have come true. Okay, Karina, and then after that I will read what Jansen has said in the chat box.
It's nice going last because then I can hear what everybody else has said. It's interesting. I had two strong reactions to the stories, but not in the way you might think. The story in Tapestry of Faith about Ethelred Brown and going from Jamaica and coming back and forth. I didn't like the way that story was told. I thought it sounded really apologist for the people who were actively making things difficult for him. And I was kind of like, why are we telling this story from this perspective? I mean, there was no, no claiming that we were in the wrong, that the people who were doing those things were in the wrong. The moral that we were supposed to take, and I imagine the children who would be told the story were supposed to take, was that you just got to keep on trying, no matter what. And it's like, but the reality was that there were significant things placed in front of his call, and so that kind of got me upset. and then similarly, the story about was it Carter, right? Where the congregation found out about him after the fact that they had neglected him.
Yeah, William H.D. Carter.
Yeah, and in the end, the white woman, who I guess was the reverend or perhaps the president of the board of that church, was crying on the shoulders of the relative of his, the descendant of his, and that they were asking for this apology. And it was like, again, we're putting the burden on the people that we have wronged to make us feel okay now about it, and it's just like, while I understand that that can be healthy and a way to move forward, at the same time, it felt just, again, to me, misplaced in what we were asking. So I guess this is kind of a meta critique of what I read, because I'm talking about the presentation of the information rather than the information itself.
No, but it's an important lens to look at. And I read it differently. I do think that it was the descendant of Carter who was crying. So they were hugging, and then it was the minister who said, then I realized she was hugging me for so long because she was crying.
Okay, so they both were?
I think they were hugging. Yeah, I mean, maybe they probably both were crying. But, anyway, I would reread that part and see.
Okay, I will.
And I was also surprised that is the Tapestry of Faith story about Ethelred Brown. That was in the readings. Did you also read the readings about him in the Darkening the Doorways? There was much more information about Ethelred Brown in there.
Yes, I did.
And there are even other Tapestry of Faith stories about him as well.
It's just interesting to see how I think we look at ourselves as kind of a precious minority, and then that gives us this, I think, privilege to then deny that other people have perhaps even more claim to oppression, and that's very hard for us to negotiate, and we tend to push back, I think, when we get faced with that. And I think that's kind of what Bart was referring to too. It's like, and what's so surprising about that, although you see it in history all the time, is when one minority isn't able to then project that experience onto another group of people and thereby enlarge that tent and welcome them in. Instead, it's like, no, you got your own thing. You're not like us, which is just, it's just shocking to me, you know. You see that in feminism and, you know, and I guess it's because it becomes identity politics. And so it's just, this is us and not you, and you're the other. I don't know. It's hard.
Well, we will definitely continue this thread of the conversation in the next couple discussions. So I think I want to hold on to that.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, I think looking at how we talk about it and what stories we tell is huge in how we tell the stories. Yeah. So I think what we're going to do next is go for, I said I was going to read Jansen's post. I asked you to post Jansen. And you talked about the hymns. Said they seemed more about nature than humanism. And found that confusing, that the hymns seemed closer to Emerson and Thoreau. And I don't have those hymns right in front of me right now, but does anyone have any thoughts about that? Did anyone get to look at the hymns that were in the readings? I think they probably, if I remember correctly, are more about the Church Universal and more, and probably have less theist language, which Thoreau and Emerson may have also had. But we can look at that. I will look back at that.
Is there a connection between humanism and transcendentalism?
I would say that they're spiritual ancestors. I'm not sure how influenced they were. I don't have that direct line, that knowledge of that, but they were definitely around and an influence. I would.
We can do some exploration of that and come back to that next time, because that's a great question.
Yeah.
All right. Great.
Okay, so it is break time. Ooh, I like that. I'm not going to go have that on my break, but I can look at the picture.
All right.
Great. So
5 minutes.
5 minutes. So we'll see you back in 5 minutes.
We'll return.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Hi, Pat.
Hello. We're coming back.
Great.
Folks are coming back.
Any better now?
It's very choppy, Jansen. Like we can hear every other word, which is bizarre. You want to try again?
Is it your connection maybe?
The modem is like 10 feet away from her.
Okay. Well, that's better. You're better right now.
Actually, you were chopping up too, Pat.
Hmm.
So who knows?
It's funny because Jansen, sometimes you sound crystal clear and then you're like muted and really, really cool. Like you can, it's not like you're totally cut out. It's just kind of like you're at this level and then it goes down to hearing you at this level. And it's, sometimes we can hear you. It's just tricky.
Well, I'm having pretty significant thunderstorms here in my area. So I know Courtney said they were having some weather there too. So we do have some weather on the East Coast. So perhaps that is impacting some of us. So, all right. Well, I think most of us are back. We have a really lovely long post here. Deborah Eve has posted about Starita Smith. It dawned on me that she was crying and leaning on me for support. Starita is the great-granddaughter of Carter, and saying that she thinks that she read the story the way Karina did. So yeah, so that definitely, there's a lot of power in that. There's a lot of power in that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Deborah Eve, I appreciate your insight. It's, yeah, these are tough issues and tough questions, and it's happening in a context, some of the, certainly our modern context, some of these conversations in our congregations are happening in a context of fear and some, kind of negative combustible emotions. So interestingly enough, now we're going to step away for a moment, if we wish, into a land of something that maybe might have been. Thinking, we've talked, several of you have lifted up some missed opportunities and some of the ways that our African American ancestors were really excluded from opportunities for ministry, excluded from resources and financial resources in particular that they needed to survive, let alone become prophetic voices in this faith. So these two questions, and we're going to, everyone needn't chime in on this. We can just do a little popcorn thing and get 3 or 4 of us to contribute. And then we're going to move into actually a little deeper conversation in breakout rooms, really thinking about some of our own theological influences and some of our own reactions. So what role did voices and perspectives from the denominational margins play in shaping our faith in this particular time? Specifically, were the voices and concerns of people of color, immigrants, and labor part of our story? Talk about context. Think about our major, our current context. People of color, immigrants, labor. The cycle has repeated itself. And the second question, can you imagine a story for what might have been if voices and perspectives from the margins had been more fully heard? So just take a minute to kind of take in that question, and then we'd love to hear from several folks.
What if I throw out another question into this for people?
She's not as comfortable with silence as I am.
Yeah. Oh, okay. You really want me to give more silence?
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I was just going to let it go until.
You're just gonna let it go.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Because I know we have talked, I feel like we've touched on this a little bit in our opening.
Yeah.
So not just on what might have been, but kind of what might we do now? I think we're at another, hopefully tipping point, or, you know, we're in a time when we're being called and questioned and challenged again, as a country, as a faith, as a people. And what role do you think we could play in our congregations, in our denominations, so that we don't continue this, what might have been, but what can we do? Does anyone have any thoughts if we frame it that way? I'm curious.
So somebody had mentioned, I think it was Meredith mentioned beyond categorical thinking, BCT.
Mm-hmm.
We did that at our congregation, and it was really interesting to put it very forthright, to say, how would you feel if your minister were mentally ill? How would you feel if your minister were transgender? You know, they went through all of these various qualities that people could have. And, you know, I had really thought of our congregation as being, when we look at the congregation, it looks pretty similar. We are all from a similar demographic, but I thought that we were more inclusive than it turned out we were. Mm-hmm. And some of the congregation's responses to BCT were really surprising and quite honest. And so I would say, if anyone hasn't done it, it's an interesting journey.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Bart has his hand up. And then Terry?
You know, it's something I spend a lot of time thinking about, is how do we lift up the voices of our youth and young adults of color, particularly. I mean, that's part of my job at the UUA. And, you know, this past GA, the youth and young adults of color came forward and, you know, shared a responsive resolution, which was unanimous. But, you know, it happened on Sunday after most folks had left. And, you know, are the people who were there really the people who needed to hear that story? You know, the UU World article afterwards mentioned someone saying, like, oh, why did they do that? We just raised $89,000 for Black Lives of UU. So, you know, it's how do we lift up the voices of the marginalized, knowing that for the majority of our congregations and the majority of our members, they're still in a learning process of getting there. They want to be, right? They really, really want to be. And yet it's not always there. I'm thinking about the struggle in some of our congregations around hanging a Black Lives Matter sign. And how does that get involved? And something that I say when I consult with congregations, actually just at Mid-America's, leadership school, I had someone ask me, who was the social justice chair, the youth constantly come forward, she said, about, they want to help, they want to be a part of it. And, in the past, the chairs have said, oh, great, we need babysitters. How many times have we relegated marginalized people to positions of support instead of reframing our own positions of power? And so what I said to her was, what would it look like if you, as chair of the Social Justice Committee, said, you know what, I want to hear your voice, and how would you like to step into a leadership role? Maybe co-chair, maybe not, but where I see my job as being able to pick up the slack that you're going to leave behind because you're a student and that's just what's going to happen. And, to equip and to remove obstacles and to help you succeed. What if we saw that as our responsibility as leaders within the faith, as to step back and to lift up voices of marginalized folks and to figure out how we can remove obstacles to make, their voices heard more, or so that we don't necessarily need to have, we'll always need to have healing spaces, but so that the healing spaces aren't being used because of us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Terry had a hand up, and then I have a post from Jansen that I'll share.
Just also along the lines of what Bart is saying about that stepping back. I'm thinking of the story of Miss Annie and what happened to her mission, and what happened when everyone else thought they could run it better than her. Mm-hmm. When she was the one engaged in the struggle, she was the one on the front running her school. And then I also wrote down the differences of what the Unitarian Service Committee was focused on versus what the Universalist Service Committee that was supportive was focused on. And the Unitarians were focused on service projects run by paid experts in systemic change, and Universalists on people-to-people contacts, what different cultures might learn from each other. And I was thinking about that, the Universalist focus, and how that does lead to systemic change. That's the engagement, and that's the place where I think we focus, and we need to focus. And there's an engagement that recognizes that we don't have all the answers. Our power is not. We have to let go of some of that power and be a part of that change together. So I think that's where we need to lead into.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks, Terry. So Jansen had a comment. It seems the stories about what might have been are stronger than the stories of positive influence. Martin Luther and Coretta Scott King considered joining the Unitarian Church faith, but they realized that they would be standing on the sidelines instead of being in the fight. There's an unpleasant passivity amongst us, and I include myself. Yeah, I think that's a narrative that is there. Thanks, Jansen. So Karina found the raise hand button.
Oh, I think we can say that history is relevant, right? I mean, there's a reason why it's like, oh, you history, what does it really have to do with anything today? But it has a lot of bearing on who we are. I've always struggled with having joined the church about 25 years ago, that very little is asked of me. And I wonder why that is. Even in the mission of our church, we talk about transforming lives. It's part of our mission that we have on the wall in our sanctuary. But I always think we're thinking about other people's lives and not our own. But I just don't see any of this really changing until people are willing. but then if we're not, what impetus is there to change? And I think it's really hard because it's that whole comfort the afflicted, afflict the comfortable thing. And I don't have the same background as a lot of you use, which is having had a poor experience in a different religion and finding this one. I was unchurched, so I don't have a lot of I don't have any negative associations with a lot of things that I think could help propel us forward in that sense of being, I don't know, around language and a lot of other stuff. And so just speaking of this, how this history relates to how we can allow ourselves to be transformed, I do think the more people we welcome into our faith, the better off we'll be. And I really liked and I haven't seen much about it lately, but Peter Morales, and when he was in the minister in Golden, had the whole radical hospitality as a spiritual path, and that as a spiritual practice that we should be doing on a regular basis, day in and day out. And I think if we could rally around that, I think we'd have a lot of change going forward. I don't know. It's just my thought.
Great. Thank you. Deborah Eve has a hand up, and then perhaps we'll move to our breakout rooms. Sadie, does that sound about right? All right. Go ahead, Deborah Eve. Unmute yourself.
I think one of the things that we have to be braver about is just talking about class within our congregations. And we don't really talk about that in the United States at large, but we really don't within our congregations. And I mean, because it comes down to people saying, well, we're really nice people, and that's true. But I have met many people, and even last week, I had someone say to me that they had never felt comfortable or welcome in any group of Unitarian Universalists because they lived in a small house and they lived in a part of Detroit where Unitarian Universalists, they'd gone to some of the congregations there, and the first thing was what that was asked was, where do your children go to school? All the markers that might seem just really friendly to some people, but actually are communicating difference. So I don't know how we do that. I mean, I think, and just going back to thinking about the role that people of color and immigrants and labor have played in part of our story, to me, it's really obvious that we in the United States right now would not even have our concept of what it means to be an American or to be, our ideas of democracy and freedom if we hadn't had those voices questioning what it is that we thought we were doing as a collective country. So the part that's sad to me is maybe some of the things that we hold most dear personally and that we are committed to, in fact, are because of this exchange of cultures. And we're still kind of talking about different cultures, and we want to recognize that, but we actually are all Americans. I mean, African Americans are no less American than anybody else, but in fact, even white Americans may be more African than they realize because of the contributions, for instance, things like that.
Okay, any burning responses, or are we ready to settle into? Meredith, is that you? Are you back? Did we lose you for a minute?
Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, yep, I lost that signal going through the sticks here, so I'm going to review.
Okay. So we're going to move into a little bit of a deeper question, and we're going to break into small groups for this. So you might want to, use your phone, take a quick picture of this, and or we can put it in the chat box so that you can keep the question close to you. Where does your own faith and or theological understanding match with the conclusions in Unitarians Facing a New Age? So Unitarians Facing a New Age were in the reading, and I had it before, and then somehow my book got messed up. So they're talked about in a handout from workshop 3 of Faith Like a River. So it was a commission made up of James Luther Adams and soon to be AUA President Frederick May Elliott. They created this report in 1936 that made it very clear that humanism was now the dominant theological position in the movement. So they were pretty forthright about it. They were pretty open about it. If you think that having 2 ministers craft a statement is an open process. If we set aside the outdated language in that document and focus on the ideas expressed, what still seems current for today and what might be dated? So if you have that, if you can pull that document up, or if you can recall some of the pieces of that. The first time I ever read that, I was like, wow, this is like deja vu all over again. I heard a lot of language and ideas that felt familiar to me. So, but I've been around a long time. So we're going to slip into breakout rooms now. So everybody hold on and give me a minute here to go ahead and create some rooms. I see we lost Meredith again. All right.
I just posted it in the chat box. The first part is the Unitarians agree section, and the second part is the Unitarians disagree section.
Great. Oh, thank you. Good. All right. So we're headed into the rooms. We'll see you about 15 minutes. Terry. You're back, Terry. You were frozen there at the end.
Yeah, hi.
That's okay.
No, they lost me.
Back.
Sorry, don't worry about it. That's all I wanted to say. I don't know.
Good.
Yeah. Just that there's a lot more to it than just the mind. All the sources, direct experience of mystery and world religion.
Well, and I think about how you have so much to learn from other people living out their religious lives. Even though that's, as a humanist, that would not be something that I would choose to do on my own. See someone else lead that, have that fulfillment. I would want to learn as much as I could from that.
So we're back, but we can't stop talking. See, it was such a good conversation. So did you guys agree or disagree? Just kidding.
It was good. Can you guys hear me okay? My computer said okay. Something funny popped up and said your microphone isn't detected. But.
Okay. All right. So so we need to, Sadie, as our resident historian, so the Unitarians agree. So does it mean that they agreed to disagree with each other, or that they disagreed with the larger religious community?
So our interpretation of it and what I was remembering. So the first part is Unitarians agree that this is what religion is for us. And then they disagree on how they practice it. Does that make sense? So they disagree on what the language is.
Mm-hmm.
They disagree on the wisdom of maintaining it as a Christian tradition. So some want to keep it as a Christian tradition, some don't. So that's where the disagreement is.
Okay.
So that's that's what, and then
that's clarifying for I think for the
Okay.
conversation that we were having. So
sure. I don't have any proof that that's what it is, but that's our invitation. That's what makes sense to me. And
Good.
that's how we were looking at it.
Good.
And we kind of still see evidence of that today, and see that as a thread.
Yeah, and we actually, I think Deborah Eve lifted up the heresy thread of how we were talking about how did that even come up? We were talking about who remembers? Deborah Eve. How did that come up? You're muted, Deborah Eve.
Did you see one of these that looked like heresy to you?
Just that if you're looking globally in terms of world history and how the church was the reigning power not that long ago before our period, that and our roots in having to be heretics, that's to me would be part of why some of that is stated the way it is. Plus, I'm going to guess that some people, some of the disagreement part to be in the agreement, and they couldn't agree to how to state that, right? So, I mean, it is actually a really, because, I mean, if you think about like an established church like Catholicism, they don't have, I don't think, a similar thing, but maybe they do.
Yeah, I think it started because Karina pointed out that a lot of contemporary Unitarian Universalists define themselves by what they don't believe. And that there was a thread of that, and that thread went back sort of to our history as heretics. That's what.
Yeah.
Yeah, so any big thing, we have a minute, just any big threads that came out in your group, the other breakout.
Anyone want to touch on anything more from us? I'm blanking on what our threads were. All I know, it was very interesting.
Good. Okay. Well, then we will move on. And let's see what we can pull up here. We're in the home stretch here, friends. Am I doing this or are you doing this?
Let me just find out what this is.
This is talking about the final project.
Okay, I can do this.
Sure.
Great. So we've talked about this a little bit before, but what we'd like you to do before next session is to come up with your idea and your proposal of what you'd like to do for your final project. And then we will give you an okay on that and make sure everyone's all set, because for the 6th session, you will be presenting. And so we hope you will prepare a project that shows a way to use what you've learned in your professional work. And please take about 3 hours to prepare it, and leaders, and then we'll approve it. And you'll have about 10 to 15 minutes to present your project on that last session. And we'll open up a thread on the forum to share your ideas and to form teams, and so you can talk to each other about that. Mm-hmm. And we will ask that then your presentations are shared with us, and so you send them to us a little bit ahead of time so that we can share them on the screen, and then we like to have them all. Pat Kahn from the UA loves to see our projects, so we'd love to be able to share them with each other, and definitely share sources and give people credit for for the work that you've done. And we also definitely encourage you to do this in teams as you'd like to. The last time I led this, most people did it on their own, which was interesting. We only had a couple people do it together. I really enjoyed doing mine with Barb Grieve when we did the timelines together. There's something nice about collaboration in Renaissance modules. You get to do stuff with colleagues. So if you've got, some of you have very specific things in mind, and it's a great way to do a project in this time for something that you're going to need. And I definitely support that. I also, see how you can collaborate with each other and if that works.
Okay.
So is there another section to this, or
just
that's the closing words? Are there any questions?
Yeah.
Any questions from anybody about final projects?
And, don't be scared by the 3-hour thing. That could include time that you spend writing. It could include time you spend emailing a partner. So it could include some time you may spend on Google. So it's an ideal, let's just say, but we know that we're all busy, and you don't need to spend 3 hours if you find information readily available for your project, and you can do it in a little bit less time. But.
Yeah. So I guess I have a quick question for you. How long has the reading taking you for this? Is it about 3 hours of reading, or is it more or less?
Longer.
Longer. Okay. When we do the evaluation for the course, I think that would be great to keep track of. If you could share with us how much the workload is, because we have tried to, or PatCon has tried to tailor it down so it's not so much reading, because that was the feedback we got from the first couple times we did the course.
Mm-hmm.
So the 3 hours is supposed to be about how much prep time we're expecting for each session. So
Mm-hmm.
how will we submit our proposals? If you could email Pat or I. Do you have our emails, everybody?
Yeah, let's see, did we set up a Google folder for this class? We've been using Google folders for some of the other online modules.
Not that I know of. I know we've just been using the forums. Would you like to set one up, Pat?
Yeah, we can do that. We can do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that will be a way that where you could submit not just the proposals, but the final projects. You could put them all there.
With the final projects, we can also set up documents for, just some sharing, or in the UU Identity, we set up, several pages for different proposed projects, and people just began to kind of share ideas in a Google Doc. So that's one way of doing it, not the only way. And not, if that's not something you know how to do, we don't necessarily expect you to do that. But we can use, we have technology, and if we can find a way for it to make the communication happen with more easily, then we would love to do that, help you do that. So either a forum thread or Google Doc.
Great. So Pat, so does that mean, he said, Jansen said they email proposals to us. So that's...
Sure. They can still email a proposal to us.
To us. And then if you want, we'll get that, that Google folder up soon, so that if you want to collaborate with each other, you can communicate, and then one of you or a couple that you would then share your proposal with us before next time you work together. Sound good?
Yeah.
Great. How many of you think you already know what you'd like to do for your proposal? Not yet. One, Jansen knows. A couple people thinking about it, shaking heads. I think from your forum posts, I think some of your ideas are just really exciting. So keep thinking about it. And
yeah, Deborah Eve has had her hand up.
Okay, I didn't see it.
I mean, I'm just wondering if it's appropriate, because to me 3 hours is not really enough time to do very much. So can it be framed as a piece towards a larger project, or to something that would grow later,
Yes. We don't have an you have 10 to 15 minutes for this. And that really depends on how many projects there are. If everybody does an individual project, it's going to be on the 10-minute side. If we have some group projects, we can give you a little bit more time. But really, we just want you to kind of frame it for us and just demonstrate that some of the stories and some of the concepts and some of the threads of history that you've read them, you've understood them, and you're integrating them into your work in some meaningful way. It's just a demonstration project, and you shouldn't be intimidated by it.
Sure. And if you have 2 people working on it, you'll have 6 hours of work going into the project. So those projects might be a little more fleshed out. If you got 3 people, you got 9 hours, so you can see how they come. They'll be in varying degrees of levels of completion.
We would probably not approve one project with 9 people.
What could you accomplish? Create a whole new module.
Okay. Any questions, or we're actually right on time, maybe even a minute or two early.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Great. And I see Lane and Karina are maybe doing a project together. That's great. And I have asked Karina to do the closing reading for us.
Mm-hmm.
Are you ready?
Yeah, and I just sent a link to a description of the Parliament from last year. It was in Salt Lake City, and it's from the UU Women's group, and they were there. There were 10,000 people at the Parliament in Salt Lake City, and they are committed to doing it every other year. I think after the first one, they did another one 100 years later. So there was a period where they weren't doing it. And then they did one to mark the 100th anniversary of it with a new one. And since then, they've done one 3 years, 5 years, and all around the world, Australia, other places. And now they're trying to do it every other year. And my friends who went had an amazing, powerful time. I'm really interested in going one time. And one of the things in the article, she talks about how the Sikhs fed everybody every morning for free. They had 10,000 people and they fed them all. So anyway, let me see if I can read this whole thing here. What can religion further do to advance the condition of the colored people? More religion and less church, less theology and more of human brotherhood, less declamation and more common sense and love for truth. The tendency of creeds and doctrines to obscure religion, to make complex that which is elemental and simple, to suggest partisanship and doubt in that which is universal and certain, has seriously hindered the moral progress of the colored people of this country. It should be the province of religion to unite and not to separate men and women according to the superficial differences of race lines.
Wow.
May it be so.
May it be so, indeed. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for a good session. And we will look forward to reading your forum posts and look forward to hearing about possible projects, group projects, before August 14th, August 13th, whenever next we meet. So thank you all.
Bye. Thanks, Pat and Sadie. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for your work.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys. Great.